Everybody. So I'm here to talk about quality assurance and give you a little bit of oversight of what it is and what we do in QA and to ensure that you can get Rockstar level testing on any projects that you work on in the future. So just a quick question. Who here currently or has previously worked in QA? No one? Oh, one. There we go. And who here has worked with QA departments on titles that they've worked on in the past? All right. And how many folks here have no clue what QA does at all? They're just here to learn what the mysteries are. Cool. Got a couple there. Thank you. So quickly just go over who I am. My name's Teressa Wright. I've worked in the video game industry for about 10 or so years now. I have started out as a tester back in 2006, working for a little company called Sega. Working in California. First game I ever worked on was a mech warrior battler game called Chrome Hounds. I would not be surprised if none of you have heard it before, but it was quite fun. I would suggest searching it out if you are interested in mech battlers. From that point, I've tested hundreds of games in all different countries around the world. So I've worked out of Japan, I've worked out of Canada instead of QA, or they can take their skills over to software where they can get some rather eye-wateringly high salaries. So it's understandable why it's a little hard to get them into games QA. The ones that we have are generally either homegrown or they are trained or they're taken straight out of college. But if anybody here is currently looking at getting into development and wants to be in a position that's really in demand, might want to consider it because, yeah, you will be loved if you go into sort of SDEP for QA. So these test and development engineers create tools and programs to help test the game based around the source code, working on hooks in the code that are suggested by QA created by the devs. These hooks can be used for game automation. Hooks are a part of the code base that can be used to run tools or gather telemetry without having an effect on the game itself. For example, if a game has a hook that allows a tool to track wherever people have been in the game, test can then use that to see areas that have been very well covered or not covered at all by creating a heat map that shows which areas have been tested and which haven't. Test development engineers can build all kinds of other cool tools though. They can do like automated unit tests, integration checks, auto bug report generation that includes a crash log every time the game crashes, straight into the database, no fuss. Build distribution systems. There's all kinds of cool stuff that they're able to do these days. All right, so next up, your best bet for confidence is going to be some combination of white box and black box, which, strangely enough, is called gray box testing. One of the things you need for gray box testing is embedded testers. They're an absolute must for this combined approach. They can work alongside your development every single step of the way, testing features as they are built and creating test cases alongside the game's development. They can also bring their extensive test experience into play, even from the conceptual stages of the game, letting development know of potential new features are going to be risk-laden and give advice on how to avoid these issues before coding even begins. Ideally, these embedded testers would also be collaborating with any future black box testers, with the on-site team being the point of reference for game direction and test planning, and then handing the information to the latter black box testers so they're prepared and have a better understanding of what the game is supposed to do when they get hands-on. The black box team would be approaching the game as end users, as we explained earlier, but the embedded team can work on hybrid testing. So they can be testing the features in isolation to check that they work as expected. They can usually do this within the engine sometimes. If they're using Unity or if you're using Unreal, they can actually create tests to be sure that they're working the way they're supposed to. And then they can then take that and check it within the game itself to make sure that your unit tests are actually showing up correctly when it comes to being in game. They can often create some really interesting automation as well that'll take that off the hands of people having to work on actually building the game, and then you have QA doing all of the little extra bits, making sure it all works. An embedded team would also be able to catch a large percentage of issues very early on, in most cases as soon as they appear in the game. Partnered with automation, this combo of testers on site, custom test plans, and tools being built to aid the testing from the start, it's a very powerful teaming. You'll catch most of your errors long before they become pricey massive fixes down the line. If embedded testing is on the cards, consulting with a test team in the very early stages is your next best bet. Now, this isn't particularly common yet, but there are places that do this, and it's something that's worth researching. Where you can either approach some companies that might offer these services, but you might also know QA people yourselves, and you can have them come in and tell you what things they might know about possible pitfalls you're going to hit. So first up, I would definitely suggest if you're building a console game, see if you can consult with some compliance people. Compliance issues are first-party standards that they will check. First-party standards are what will fail your game when you try to submit it, and these are very, very complicated. The compliance testers can offer a lot of advice on how the game should function right from the start, so you can build up your game instead of waiting until the traditional time when compliance testing starts, which is black box, and then realize you have to rebuild a lot of systems in your game to be able to get your pass out of first-party submission. First-party standards sometimes might feel a little bit arbitrary, but they are geared towards game quality, user experience, and parity across all games that are available on the systems. There's things like games should not crash and achievements must unlock might seem like a little bit of a no-brainer, but there's some more difficult stuff in there, like how to deal with profile sign-in changes, and the official naming standards as well could be quite difficult to deal with. For example, incorrect terminology can really cause a lot of problems. Sorry. You're certainly going to get in trouble if you accidentally leave some Xbox button prompts into your PlayStation port. That's a pretty obvious one. But you might also not realize that you'll get in just as much trouble if you submit something that has PlayStation without the capitalized S. Little simple things like this are things that you can talk to compliance guys about, and they'll be able to help you out. Whether you're new to development or an OG pro, there's value to be found in consulting and functionality testers as well. We can advise you on what debug menu options QA will need, like a way to unlock all the levels and items in the game so that they can check all these things really quickly without having to play through and gather everything themselves. Or perhaps they might suggest, if you're working on a 100+ hour RPG, a text viewer so they can see all the in-game dialogue text all at once rather than having to play the whole thing. They can also let you know what essential functions for what test will require, so you can focus on getting those things into the game before you have any black box testers jump on. One important one that springs to mind for me is save and load functionality. I would definitely suggest you get that really early into the game if you want your test team to not hate you. Because if they have to continue playing, have to restart playing the game right from the very start, every single time it crashes, they might get a little bit testy. So yeah, definitely have the save load in there. They can also give you a heads up of other common errors, pitfalls they've encountered in the past. And another big thing is they can tell you about potential exploits that they might be able to see. Just looking at your game design documentation, they can say, well, these certain things may happen. And lastly, localization. If your game is going to be localized into any other languages, you really, really need to consult with localization teams early on. Something I've seen far too often is localization being shoehorned in at the end and it holding everything up. Even to the point where if you have incorrect localization in there, it can fail your submission if you're submitting to first party. Localization is a lot more work than using Google Translate and calling it a day. The timelines on these are actually a lot more immense than you probably account for, or generally most people don't. Even English can cause major localization problems. For example, I worked on a game many years ago that was in American English. They had a character who fell down, landed on her butt, and exclaimed, Ow, I bruised my fanny. Now, thankfully, we had a British team that were also working on the game, and they very quickly pointed out that that had a very different meaning in the UK, and we were able to get that fixed. But it was something that just had been completely missed by the American team. The earlier you get tests involved with these things, the less surprises you're going to have across the board. So if you can get talk to some QA people early on, you'll find that you'll be able to do things a lot more smoother. All right, next I'm going to talk a little bit about test-driven development. This isn't a stunning recommendation for it, but I think it's an interesting concept and it's worth discussing. It's a big buzz phrase at the moment in software development. Not too many places have this fully implemented. It's more of an ideal than a practicality, but there's some elements of this that you might find useful. In TDD, coders will create unit tests prior to writing any code for a feature. Now this means that they create the test to see if the feature works before the feature even exists. With me so far? They then will run the test to make sure that it fails, even though the feature doesn't exist. They just need to make sure that the unit test is working correctly. They then write the code. The code is written until the unit test passes. So once the feature is done, the unit test passes, it means the feature's working the way it's supposed to. They then refactor the code until it's down to its absolute simplest terms. They'll pull stuff out of it until it's down just to the minimum part that's needed, and the test still passes. And then those unit tests are integrated into an automated test framework so that it's any time that any new code is added, it's run again just to make sure that it hasn't been rebroken by anything else going in. Now, the ultimate aim of TDD is to not need tests at all. But can anybody here think of maybe one or two problems that might come up from that? Well, here's a couple. So TDD tests parts of the game in isolation. Black box testers test the game as a whole, and they see all the things that don't work well together. Tests written by development check whether a feature works or not, but they don't check whether they improve the whole experience or not. Testers can feedback on whether something doesn't feel right or not. They see the game, not the features, and they aren't afraid in any way to speak up when something isn't right. Development may not know enough about testing to really put the code through its paces. It's likely that some will write tests that just show if something works within a single static environment. Testers know from experience that nothing should be looked at in isolation, and there are multiple scenarios that need to be checked, which may be missed otherwise. And lastly, and this is probably the most important thing, it takes a lot of time to write all of these unit tests. And it's unlikely that anybody would have the time to write a unit test prior to writing any features. Now, it's a lot of features that go into games. And I'm sure most people who've worked in development know fine well that you haven't got time to even write the code that you have to write. To also have to write a unit test on top of that might just be a little difficult. Yeah, TDD is an interesting idea. I don't see it gaining a toehold into games anytime soon, but there might be some parts of it that would be useful to people, or at least something to think about. Perhaps not test-driven development, but at least the idea that development can look at their own code and maybe build their own tests. Maybe not before they write their features, but the idea that they can have a look at these things themselves is kind of interesting. All right, so to finish up, what is Rockstar level testing? So, Rockstar level testing is testing from the very start. Consider testing when you're designing the game. Get everyone involved. Devs can test their own features. It doesn't necessarily mean it has to be TDD, but with automation, it's possible to check anything prior and after it's integrated into the game. Tests should be involved in every step of the process, not just at the end. If it's viable to do this, you're going to have such a huge increase in time and value to your game. You're not going to have to worry about the excess stuff on the end, trying to cram in every single bug fix. This stuff will be caught early on, and it'll be a lot smoother. And if all of the previous is done, black box testing is an absolute breeze. So time and money saved, and a better product to boot. What's not to love about that? All right. Thank you. Got time for questions, I suppose? Yes. There's some ways. One way I've heard, and I've done this, and it's interesting. A guy I talked to a while back, he worked for another company, but his idea was just brilliant, was bring your person in for an interview, sit them down, and give them a box of tissues, and then tell them to test it, and see what they do. You know, someone who's not going to be a good tester, pull out a tissue, turn it upside down, stick it on its side. It works, it's fine. Someone who's going to be a fantastic tester, he's going to rip that to shreds, he's going to light it on fire, hopefully maybe not set off any fire alarms, but he's going to do a lot of stuff to it. He's going to throw it, he's going to kick it, and then he's going to come back and say, yeah, it broke. And this is how it broke, and this is what I did. And that's when you know you've got someone who's a good tester. Now, I don't say you have to go to that kind of extreme, but you can give people a lot of ideas of saying, okay, so ask them to talk about bugs that they found and what they did about it. And then if they've gone out of their way to find these things, you know, ask them for exploits. That's another good one too, because if anybody's found an exploit in a game, they've gone to the effort to do that. If they haven't just got it from online, they've put the effort in and said, that doesn't work properly, and I can use that to my advantage. Those are really good people to hire in because they're people who think outside the box. Oh, yes?
I'm sure it doesn't change so much in principle, but how would this process be adjusted if your users are really small kids?
It doesn't really adjust the process at all, and I think there's just as much need for testing. In fact, there's probably even more testing if you're going to have little kids that get their hands on it to make sure that there's nothing in there that could possibly be offensive. That's a big one. But B, little kids aren't going to play games very linearly. They're going to do anything and everything. They're going to be bouncing off of walls, and that's when you really need to make sure that if they hit that wall, they're not going to fall through and then fall out the world. So yeah, testing for games for kids who aren't going to play by the rules. Yeah, you're going to need to have testers who aren't going to play by the rules as well.
Are there any resources that you can potentially point me to that kind of speak to this particular demographic a little bit more?
Not particularly that I know of. You know, the testers that I've worked with, we worked on every single level of gaming. So whether it's you know, the fully adult first-person shooters, or it's you know, like a My Little Pony type game, they'll test them all. So yeah. Yes.
Okay, Lisa, thank you very much, Teresa.